On the night of January 5th, 1971, Geraldine Liston returned to her Las Vegas home after a 2-week trip to find a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. The lights were off. The mail was piling up, but it was the smell that hit her first. A sweet, sickly odor drifting down the hallway that told her something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. She walked to the master bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs, and pushed open the door. And there, slumped against the foot of the bed, was the man the world called the Big Bear, Sonny Liston, the heavyweight champion of the world, the man who had terrified Muhammad Ali, the man who could punch through a brick wall. He was dead. His body was bloated, decomposing, a tragic mountain of flesh that had once ruled the ring. But it was not the body that made the police freeze when they arrived. It was what was on the nightstand, a syringe, and a small bag of heroin. The police report called it a simple overdose, another washed-up boxer chasing a high. But everyone who truly knew Sonny Liston took one look at that needle and felt a chill run down their spine. Because they knew the secret. They knew that Sonny Liston, the scariest human being to ever wear boxing gloves, had a phobia. He was terrified of needles. He was so afraid of them that he would refuse medical treatment for cuts after a fight. He would faint at the sight of a doctor holding a syringe. The idea that this man, alone in the dark, would voluntarily inject himself with heroin was not just unlikely, it was impossible. Which meant only one thing. Sonny Liston did not kill himself. Someone else did. And they did it to send a message. As the coroner wheeled the body bag out of the house, the whispers began in the shadows of the Las Vegas Strip. The mob had finally come to collect the debt. The monster of the ring had been put down by the monsters who owned him. To understand how the strongest man in the world ended up dead with a needle in his arm, you have to understand the world that built him. Sonny Liston was not born. He was forged. He was born into the brutal poverty of an Arkansas sharecropping family, one of 25 children. He had no birth certificate. He did not know his own age. He grew up with the whip scars of his father on his back. By the time he reached St. Louis as a teenager, he was a giant, silent, angry force of nature. He did not know how to read or write, but he knew how to hurt people. And in the 1950s, if you were a black man with fists like sledgehammers and no family to protect you, there was only one career path waiting for you. You did not become an athlete. You became an asset. You became property of the Mafia. Sonny did not choose the mob chose him. While he was in prison for robbery, his talent was spotted, not by a coach, but by a talent scout for the Vitali crime family. They saw a weapon. They paid his legal fees, got him paroled, and put him in the ring. But the price of his freedom was his soul. From the very first bell, Sonny Liston fought for them. Every dollar he made, they took the lion's share. Every opponent he knocked out, he did it to make them richer. He was the ultimate gladiator, a man who terrified the public, terrified his opponents, but who was secretly terrified of the men in silk suits sitting in the front row. He was the king of the ring, but outside the ropes, he was a slave. This dynamic set the stage for one of the greatest tragedies in sports history. The public saw a monster. They called him a thug, a criminal, a beast. They did not see the leash around his neck. They did not see that the scariest man on the planet was living in constant fear of a phone call from a man named Frankie Carbo, the mob's czar of boxing. And when Sonny eventually became the heavyweight champion, destroying Floyd Patterson in 2 minutes, he thought he had finally earned his freedom. He was wrong. He had just become too valuable to ever let go. And when an asset becomes a liability, the mob has a very specific way of liquidating it. This story is not just about boxing. It's about a murder that has been covered up for 50 years. It's about the phantom punch against Muhammad Ali that was not a knockout, but a dive taken to save a life. And it's about that needle in Las Vegas. But before we dig into the dark evidence, I have a question for the boxing fans in the room. This is still the biggest debate in sports history. That second fight with Ali, the Phantom Punch. Do you think Sonny Liston really got knocked out? Or did he take a dive because the mob told him to? Drop your verdict in the comments below. Dive or knockout? Let the debate begin. And let's get back to the moment the mob decided Sonny Liston had to die. To own a heavyweight champion in the 1950s was better than owning a bank. A bank could be robbed. A champion simply printed money every time he stepped into the ring. And Sonny Liston was the most lucrative asset the underworld had ever seen. But he did not belong to a manager or a trainer. He belonged to a shadow corporation run by two men, Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo. Carbo was a hitman for Murder, Inc., who had transitioned into the czar of boxing. He ran the sport from the back room of a hardware store, deciding who fought, who won, and who bled. Blinky Palermo was his front man, a fix-it guy who carried the cash and the contracts. They looked at Sonny Liston and saw the ultimate weapon. But they did not just want him to box. They wanted him to break people, both inside the ring and out. Before Sonny was fighting for titles, he was fighting for the mob's labor unions. This is the part of his history that has been scrubbed from the record books. When the Vitali crime family needed to break a strike or intimidate a construction foreman, they did not send a guy with a bat. They sent Sonny. Imagine being a factory worker on a picket line and seeing a 220-pound giant with fists the size of hams walking toward you, dead silent, eyes like granite. You did not fight back. You ran. Sonny was arrested dozens of times for personating an officer, wearing a police uniform to scare strikers, and assault. He was the mob's golem. He did their dirty work because he believed that if he made them happy, they would eventually let him be the champ. He did not realize that by doing their dirty work, he was making himself unelectable. He was becoming the villain the world needed to hate. By the late 50s, Sonny had destroyed every contender in the heavyweight division. He broke jaws. He cracked ribs. He knocked men unconscious with jabs. He was the uncrowned king, but he could not get a title shot. The current champion, Floyd Patterson, and his manager were terrified of him. More importantly, the NAACP and the boxing commissions did not want a mob enforcer holding the most prestigious belt in sports. They blocked him at every turn. Sonny sat in his dressing room, listening to the mob guys count the money from his fights, money he barely saw, and he simmered with rage. He was the best, but he was treated like a dog. But Frankie Carbo had a plan. He knew that everyone has a price, even the squeaky clean camp of the champion. The mob forced the title fight in 1962. They used leverage, threats, and money to get Patterson into the ring. The fight lasted 2 minutes and 6 seconds. Sonny obliterated Patterson. It was a massacre. He was the heavyweight champion of the world. He expected to be embraced. He expected the love that Joe Louis got. He flew back to his home city of Philadelphia, expecting a parade. He had even prepared a speech. But when he walked down the stairs of the plane, the tarmac was empty. There was no band. There were no fans. Just a few reporters looking at him with fear. The public did not see a champion. They saw a monster owned by gangsters. It broke his heart. And a heartbroken giant is a dangerous thing, especially when he starts asking where his money is. This was the beginning of the end. Sonny was the champ, but he was broke. Carbo and Palermo were taking 85% of his earnings through hidden shell companies and management fees. Sonny wanted to rebel. He started drinking heavily. He started hanging out with the wrong people, loudmouths who told him he should fire the mob. But you do not fire Frankie Carbo. Sonny was trapped in a paradox. The only people who would let him fight were the people stealing his life. He was the most powerful man in the world, yet he could not buy a sandwich without asking permission. And then, a loudmouth kid named Cassius Clay showed up, and the mob realized that their invincible monster might be worth more as a victim than as a victor. The stage was set for the most controversial fights in history. The mob looked at the odds. Sonny was a 7-1 favorite against Clay, who would later become Muhammad Ali. The smart money, the easy money, was on the underdog. If the mob bet against their own fighter, they could make a fortune that dwarfed the purse of the fight. The whispers began in the gyms and the social clubs. The order was coming down. The big bear had to go down. But telling Sonny Liston to lose is one thing. Making him do it is another. Unless you threaten the one thing he cares about more than his pride, we are approaching the moment of the phantom punch, the moment that broke boxing forever. But you have to understand the pressure Sonny was under. He was not just fighting Ali, he was fighting the men in his own corner. He knew that if he won, he lost. And if he lost, well, maybe they would let him live. Or maybe they would decide that a loose end needs to be tied up with a syringe. February 25th, 1964, Miami Beach. The night the world turned upside down. Sonny Liston sat on his stool in the corner of the ring, his massive chest heaving, looking across the canvas at the young, screaming Cassius Clay. The fight was even. Sonny was not winning, but he was not losing. He was the monster. Monsters do not quit. But as the bell rang for the 7th round, Sonny Liston did the unthinkable. He spat out his mouthpiece. He stayed on the stool. He surrendered the heavyweight championship of the world, claiming a bad shoulder. The crowd went insane. The press called him a coward. But the real action was not happening in the ring. It was happening at the betting windows in Las Vegas and New York. The odds on Clay winning that fight were 7-1. If you bet $100 on Sonny, you won pennies. But if you bet $100 on Clay, you won a fortune. In the days leading up to the fight, the mob insiders, the guys connected to Frankie Carbo, were quietly putting massive amounts of money on the underdog. It was the perfect heist. They owned the favorite, but they bet on the challenger. Did they order Sonny to quit? Or did Sonny realize that if he won, he was worth nothing to them, but if he lost, he could set up a lucrative rematch? We may never know the exact words spoken in that locker room, but we know the result. The mob cleaned up. And Sonny walked away with his life, but without his belt. If the first fight smelled fishy, the rematch in Lewiston, Maine in 1965 stank of absolute corruption. It is the Zapruder film of boxing. Round 1. 1 minute and 44 seconds in. Muhammad Ali throws a quick, chopping right hand. It connects with Sonny's jaw, but it does not look hard. It looks like a slap. Yet, the 215-pound giant crashes to the canvas like he's been shot by a sniper. He rolls over. He looks up at Ali, towering over him, screaming, "Get up and fight, sucker!" And then, Sonny does the strangest thing in sports history. He lays there. He does not look groggy. He does not look unconscious. He looks afraid. He looks at the referee. He looks at his corner. He waits. And only when the count is over does he stand up. The world called it the Phantom Punch. They said Ali had magical speed. But the truth was likely far darker. Sonny did not stay down because he was hurt. He stayed down because he wanted to live. In the weeks before the fight, rumors had been swirling, not just about the mob, but about the Nation of Islam. Ali was their champion now. There were whispers that Malcolm X had been assassinated just months prior, and the tension was lethal. Some sources claim that mob enforcers paid a visit to Sonny's training camp. They did not threaten him. They threatened his wife, Geraldine. The message was simple. You go down in the first, or you do not come home. Watch the footage again. Look at Sonny's eyes as he lies on the canvas. That is not the look of a concussed man. That is the look of a man counting seconds in his head, waiting for the permission to stand up without getting killed. He threw the fight. He humiliated himself before the entire world to protect his family from the sharks he had invited into his life. It was the ultimate act of submission. The monster had been tamed, leashed, and forced to play dead. The aftermath of the Phantom Punch was a slow-motion car crash. Sonny was disgraced. He was a pariah. The boxing commissions investigated him. The fans spat on him. He was no longer the champ. He was the fixer. And to the mob, he was useless. A fixed fighter has no value once the fix is in. They had milked him for every dollar. They had bet against him and won. Now, he was just a loose end who knew where the bodies were buried. He was a liability. Sonny retreated to Las Vegas. He tried to rebuild his life. He fought obscure opponents in small venues, trying to claw back some dignity. But the shadow was always there. He started drinking heavily, vodka mostly. He started hanging around with drug dealers and low-level hustlers, the only people who would still treat him like a king. He was drifting. And a drifting man in the mob's orbit is a dangerous thing. He started talking. He started complaining about how he was robbed. He started hinting that maybe, just maybe, he would write a book or talk to the feds. This was the red line. In the underworld, you can be a drunk. You can be a junkie. But you cannot be a snitch. Sonny Liston, the illiterate sharecropper's son, had survived the hardest punches in the world. But he did not see the silent, invisible punch coming. The mob was done with him. They did not need a boxer anymore. They needed a cleanup. And in Las Vegas, cleanup crews do not use mops. They use chemistry. The man who was terrified of needles was about to have a very fatal encounter with one. The tragedy was entering its final act, and the audience was gone. Las Vegas in the late 1960s was a graveyard for elephants. It was the place where fading stars went to squeeze the last drops of fame out of their names before vanishing into the desert night. Sonny Liston was the biggest elephant of them all. He lived in a nice house in a segregated neighborhood, drove a pink Cadillac, and shook hands with tourists at casinos for pocket money. To the casual observer, he looked like a retired king enjoying his pension. But beneath the surface, Sonny was rotting. The humiliation of the Ali fights had eaten a hole in his pride that he was trying to fill with vodka and reckless company. He was not training anymore. He was drifting. And in a city run by the mob, a drifting man inevitably crashes into something dangerous. Sonny was about to make a new set of friends who would lead him directly to the nightstand with the syringe. His new inner circle was not made up of trainers or cut men. It was made up of hustlers, pimps, and low-level drug dealers. The most prominent among them was a man named Earl Cage. Cage was a known narcotics trafficker, a man watched closely by the Las Vegas police. By associating with Cage, Sonny put himself in the crosshairs of law enforcement. But more importantly, he put himself in the gray zone. The mob tolerates a lot of things, but they do not like their high-profile associates drawing heat from the narcotics squad. Sonny was becoming a hot commodity, and not in the good way. He was attracting police attention to operations that preferred to remain invisible. But the real danger was not who Sonny was hanging out with. It was what Sonny was saying. As the money from his championship days dried up, stolen by Carbo and Palermo, Sonny grew bitter. He looked at the mansions of the mob bosses, the men who had ordered him to lay down against Ali, and he felt cheated. He believed he was owed a pension. He believed that because he had taken the fall, because he had destroyed his own legacy to save them money, they should take care of him for life. He started making demands. And in the world of organized crime, a demand from a subordinate is indistinguishable from a death wish. Sonny reportedly began showing up at mob-controlled casinos, drunk and angry, demanding to see the bosses. He would shout about how he was robbed. He would threaten to create scenes. It was the behavior of a desperate man who did not realize that his friends were actually his owners. But the tipping point came when Sonny uttered the forbidden words. During a heated argument with an old associate, Sonny allegedly threatened to tell the story. He hinted that he might write a book. He hinted that he might talk to a Senate subcommittee about the fight fixing. This was a nuclear threat. If Sonny Liston testified that the Ali fights were fixed by the mob, the entire house of cards would collapse. It would bring down Frankie Carbo. It would bring down the casino owners. It would bring down the politicians who took bribes. Sonny thought this threat was leverage. He thought it would force them to pay him. He made the classic mistake of the amateur blackmailer. He thought the secret was more valuable than his silence. He forgot that the cheapest way to buy silence is a bullet, or in this case, a needle. The atmosphere around Sonny in late 1970 turned ominous. Friends noticed he was paranoid. He told people he was being followed. The Big Bear, who used to walk through the streets like a god, was now jumping at shadows. There was a specific incident just weeks before his death that signaled the end. Sonny was involved in a minor traffic accident. When the other driver got out to argue, he saw Sonny Liston sitting behind the wheel, staring straight ahead, paralyzed with fear. He was not afraid of the traffic cop. He was afraid that the accident was a setup, a trap to get him out of the car. He knew the wolves were circling. And then there was the issue of the needle itself. During this period, rumors started flying that Sonny was dealing heroin to make ends meet. The police raided Earl Cage's house and found Sonny there. It looked bad. But everyone close to Sonny, his wife Geraldine, his priest, his old trainers, swore on their lives that Sonny never used. They told stories of him hiding under the bed when a doctor came to give him a flu shot. They told stories of him screaming like a child when he had to give blood. The phobia was real. It was visceral. So, if the mob wanted to kill him, why use a needle? Why choose the one method that screams murder to anyone who knew him? The answer is cruel and simple. It was irony. It was a joke. It was the mob saying, "We own you so completely that we can kill you with your worst nightmare, and the world will just call you a junkie." It was also a practical choice. A gunshot is loud. A gunshot leads to a murder investigation. An overdose? An overdose is just a sad statistic. It closes the file quickly. It destroys the victim's reputation, along with his life. By killing him with heroin, they discredited him forever. Who would believe a junkie's stories about fixed fights? As Christmas 1970 passed, the silence around Sonny deepened. He was isolated. Geraldine went to visit her mother in St. Louis, leaving him alone in the house. It was the window of opportunity the cleanup crew had been waiting for. There were no witnesses, no bodyguards, just an aging, bitter giant sitting in an empty house, waiting for a check that would never come. The phone rang. Maybe it was a friend coming over for a drink. Maybe it was a deal. Sonny opened the door, and in doing so, he let the darkness in for the final time. The stage was set for one of the most baffling crime scenes in history. A man who could knock out a bull with a single punch was about to be taken down without a struggle. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Whoever killed Sonny Liston did not break in. They were invited. And that is the saddest part of the story. The monster was not killed by a stranger. He was likely killed by someone he trusted, someone who smiled, poured him a drink, and then watched the light go out of his eyes. The king was about to fall, and the silence that followed would last for 50 years. When the coroner finally removed Sonny Liston's body from his home on January 5th, 1971, it took 4 men to lift him. He had been dead for at least 6 days. The Big Bear, the man who had struck fear into the heart of America, had decomposed alone in the dark while the world celebrated New Year's Eve without him. The official cause of death was ruled as lung congestion and heart failure, with traces of morphine and codeine in his system. The police took one look at the needle on the nightstand, labeled it an accidental overdose, and closed the file. There was no homicide investigation. There was no yellow tape. It was treated as just another dead junkie in Las Vegas. But for those who were paying attention, the crime scene screamed of a setup. First, there was the needle itself. Sonny had a phobia so severe he would scream if a doctor approached him with a syringe. The idea that he would inject himself is psychologically impossible. Second, there was the missing equipment. A heroin user needs a kit, a spoon to cook the drug, a lighter, a tourniquet to find a vein. None of these items were found near the body. Just the needle. It was a tableau, a stage set arranged by someone who knew what an overdose looked like, but did not know how it worked. It was a clumsy forgery of a suicide. Then there is the theory of the hot shot. In the underworld, if you want to kill a junkie or make a murder look like an overdose, you give them pure heroin, or you mix it with strychnine. It stops the heart instantly. The victim does not even have time to pull the needle out. Sonny was found slumped against the bed, implying he collapsed mid-act. But without a proper murder investigation, we will never know what was really in that syringe. What we do know is that Earl Cage, the drug dealer Sonny was hanging out with, visited the house while the body was still there. Did he clean up the scene? Did he plant the drugs? Or was he just another pawn in the mob's cleanup operation? The tragedy of Sonny Liston is not just that he died, it's how he is remembered. The mob did not just take his life, they took his legacy. By staging it as an overdose, they ensured that history would remember him as a weak man, a drug addict, a loser. They robbed him of his dignity, even in death. But if he had been shot, then he would be a martyr. By overdosing, he became a cautionary tale. It was the final, the cruelest punch from the men who had exploited him since he was a teenager. Sonny Liston was the ultimate victim of the American dream's dark side. He started with nothing, no birth certificate, no education, no hope. He used his fists to climb to the very top of the mountain, becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. But he found that the top of the mountain was owned by the same men who owned the bottom. He never escaped the plantation. He just moved from the cotton field to the boxing ring. He was a man who sought respect his entire life, but found only fear. He wanted to be loved like Joe Louis, but he was forced to be the villain so the public could have someone to hate. In the end, Sonny Liston was not killed by heroin. He was killed by the silence. The silence of the boxing commissions that looked the other way. The silence of the police who refused to investigate. The silence of the fans who cheered for his knockout, but did not care about his soul. He was a gladiator who served his purpose, and when he became too heavy to carry, he was discarded. Today, Sonny Liston is buried in Las Vegas. His tombstone bears a simple epitaph, a man. It is a final, defiant statement against a world that treated him like an animal. He was a man. A flawed man, a dangerous man, but a man who deserved better than to die alone with a needle in his arm, planted by the cowards who were too scared to fight him fair. The king is dead, the fix was in, and the house always wins.